Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO, Jay Feitlinger, and no-nonsense COO, Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. Well, hello, and welcome everybody to this fresh episode of the Revenue Rewired podcast. I think it's going to be my goal to make Jay giggle during the intros.
Freshy fresh.
I don't know. It just came to me, man. It just came to me.
An 80s rapper now. Great.
Oh, sad. Well, Jay and I love that we can share with you all when we're going through actual real life experiences because, a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but sometimes you hear a podcast and you're like, well, I don't know, that doesn't really apply to me. But I think it helps us talk through some of these issues that we're having. And we'd love to know if you in the audience have any of these similar thoughts. And this one, I think, could be a little bit contrarian in its approach, which is, what HubSpot got right about sales that most service teams miss. And one of the reasons why we're talking about HubSpot in particular is, yes, while we are a HubSpot partner agency and we do use it for our own personal use, we are tool agnostic, but HubSpot really is one of the best tools out there to do a lot of the things that as marketers we need to do. And while we're helping a current client going through the process of purchasing HubSpot, it really started spiraling and maybe dominoing conversations inside our own organization about how the sales process actually works. So while HubSpot is a SaaS platform, it's created a lot of interesting dialogue between Jay and I. And while we don't always agree, it's, I think, fun to have these conversations. And so we wanted to have this conversation in front of you all. I won't lead you all into what the answer is, but Jay, I think, have we ever truly had this kind of conversation about sales cycles for us? We've had it about clients, and maybe from a historical perspective, like what's the historical thought process about the most optimal sales cycle for service-based businesses? Because I did not go to school for marketing.
Yeah. Again, I think for me, I'm not robotic when it comes to sales. And so I do adjust, obviously, on a case-by-case basis, that whole, business development process. And, there have been numerous times when I'm in the middle of it and realizing, am I helping or hurting the entire process? But I think, to your point there, what we're going to chat about here, obviously, is all about like, should you be intentional regarding kind of slowing things down? And I think, and I know me and you have had, I like how you call it fun, but we've had some interesting conversations over the last, 10 or so years, because, I often forget that I'm not practicing what I preach around, when you're selling a service, you want to sell the company and the service and not yourself. And that's where I think I've gotten hung up on in the past around, I'm just so eager to want to help businesses grow. And because of, I've been doing this for so freaking long, it comes a little bit easier to me to quickly understand where I'm seeing they have obstacles or opportunities. And then I want to kind of just get going and start solving the problem. But what I've learned is, even if the company's like, we want to move forward with you, we love your process, we've heard great things, blah, 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 let's get started tomorrow. Obviously, it's exciting from a sales perspective to be able to, close a new opportunity in one or two meetings. But, what you've taught me, Sarah, over the years is when we analyze, the ideal fit for our clients, the happiness and satisfaction we and the client are having, and then most importantly, profitability. Often, when I look at it from a negative perspective, it's tied to the business development processes that I allowed to go too fast. And so I think to your point, not to, showcase or tell the whole entire strategy or thought around this podcast show, but when Sarah was talking about HubSpot, for years, what I've been at first kind of frustrated by, but more recently impressed by is they intentionally train their team members to answer your question that you got to slow down and you got to have a few different meetings spaced out over maybe, 2 weeks or so. Because you often uncover things that you don't weren't aware of in that first meeting. It's similar to like Sarah when you do interviewing with people. Some people might come into that interview if a candidate we're thinking about hiring and could do an amazing job that first interview, but then you bring them back and have other people interview them, and a week later, all of a sudden it's like Jekyll and Hyde. And I have found that, over the last couple of years, as I've been intentional about slowing down the process and being very focused on each meeting, like the first meeting being about, are we a good fit? Both for the client benefit and ours. And then the second meeting being about qualifying and getting questions answered to then go into the third meeting, which is kind of scoping and then presenting our recommendations. I found that if we follow that kind of process where you have maybe, to answer your question now, about three different touch points, ideally before you give them, your proposal on how you can help them address whatever the opportunities are, you're likely much better off. And there have been times, as you might recall, is we have had clients that communicated how frustrated they are, where they're like, we want to move forward with you. We want to sign a contract today. Why do we need a week for you guys to go through this process? And, I think in hindsight, the companies that want to move that fast, it might actually turn into a headache for everyone because they want to kind of cut corners and it causes some issues.
Yeah, and I think like, as you're talking, there's a lot of culture too that goes into the rush to yes, right? Like how you're compensated. I think one of the oldest known for me anyways, thoughts about this is car sales is how they offer discounts at the end of the month to hit their quotas. And like everybody knows you can get it done faster if you go toward the end of the month, right? They're not going to drag it out. Well, in a service-based business, though, I think I'll give you an example of something I did recently, which this might be a overshare. I'm going to be vulnerable here for a second. I've been following this podcast called the Love Strategies guys.
Hmm.
And I've been listening to them for a year and a half or so. And I finally decided to get on one of their like biz dev calls, we'll call it. So it's called I think it's called the Love Strategy session or something like that. So basically, they're evaluating whether you could join their program or not. And they're very serious actually about how many times they follow up with you. Like, please show up to these calls because we're serious and we don't want you if you're not serious. So I appreciated that part of it. But at the end of the call, um, she was like, so what do you think? And I said, you know, I've actually never made good decisions when I've had to make them fast. And I would really appreciate some extra time to think about it. She's like, well, this, special discount deal or whatever only lasts till the end of the call and maybe for the next hour. And I was like, that's great, but that's not for me then because I won't make a decision based upon a time frame. And I left the call thinking like that was an interesting perspective, but for something that's serious, maybe there's, the disconnect of how much time you've spent thinking about it, how much information you need. So I get that there's like a rush to yes, but it's only half the story, right? For the buyer, it doesn't seem like our culture nowadays is leaning that way as much. Like rushed yeses lead to faster regrets, I think. People are looking for more time spent getting to know the relationship of this service, whatever it might be, in order to feel better about the decision, even if it takes longer. So I'm wondering too if like those are maybe some beige flags of potential prospects who are like, let's just sign today. Let's do it today. Because they might be the type who will quote figure it out later. And that's when you end up in trouble where you're like, well, I didn't know that the tool couldn't do this or, something like that. And I don't know if that's true to your experience on the front end of the sales cycle.
No, I think it definitely is. And obviously, again, people might be listening to this and their businesses are very unique, where maybe they are selling more of a of a widget or more of a templatized offering where it's like, here's our offering, here's the price, is buy it now, and off you go. So I think, again, for the purpose of our listeners, the focus me and Sarah are having today are about our kind of business where it's a long-term relationship. Again, the way I like to think about it is that business development process is like, courting and dating. And then once we sign a contract, now we're in a marriage. And I think for us, and, as most, demand generation, growth partners like our business, the lifetime value, is much more profitable for us and for the clients when we go, past that, year point. And I think again, there is, what I've learned over the years is as long as you do a really good job in that first conversation to explain what the process will look like, I find that people don't get frustrated. And that's where I think, again, I've learned from making mistakes where I did in the past rush to yes because I was so eager to help them. And I just missed, so many different things that I just wasn't aware of. And then to your point, it became a huge headache for the client and for us. And so for the last 5 years, I've been overall pretty consistent around, hey, this is probably going to be a 3 to 4 meeting process. And if you're like, I can't do that, I need to start tomorrow because we're already so far behind on, our goals and leads and whatnot, then immediately I know to your point on that, on the color of the flags, is that this is probably not going to be a good fit for us because our process is very strategic and it does take, a few weeks to rebuild and improve that foundation. And if they need to get leads tomorrow, we probably aren't a good fit. And I don't want to waste their time or ours. So I do find that if we are more open about our process and explain it, I have found more often than not, companies that we're talking to are very impressed because not only do we have an amazing process with onboarding and supporting them, but we also follow a pretty solid one from the business development side and then make sure that we're including other team members they're going to be working with so they don't feel like, they're buying it and they're, getting me. And then all of a sudden they sign the bottom, they sign the dotted line and then they don't see me ever again. And so that requires, I think, some good conversations on how you're transitioning from business development to onboarding to ongoing support.
Hmm. Yeah, so then moving from the rush to yes to the second part of our chat, which was the case for longer cycles. In some businesses and clients we've seen, they don't really have much of a choice because we'll call it the discovery process is so in depth, is so detailed that they really can't get around it, which obviously is something we help them figure out ways to, expedite it here and there. And I think AI is really going to showcase a lot of those um, speeds to the cycle process. But, let's share a little bit about why you and I started this chat in the first place, which was why we felt like maybe there is a case for a longer sales cycle. So,
Yeah, I think there, again, unfortunately, the way I was doing things, I think just caused a lot of problems for us. Again, on the operational side and the client service side and whatnot. And so, what we have done a really good job with is over the years, every time we start working with a new company, we do a really good job at reflecting on what's going well and not going well, and then adjusting our process to uncover those things. And so, I think again, the when I look at marketing companies like us, often the missing the expectations of what the client really wants is I think where often you start going, sideways. And that's never fun when you're in an early relationship where you're working so hard to earn trust. If they're expecting X and you give them Y or worst case a zebra, it causes so many problems. And so I think again to your point, it's really hard in that first meeting, similar to a first date, to know if this is going to be a really good long-term relationship. And I think giving everyone a moment to breathe and think about stuff, and to keep coming back and asking the right questions, I think will help you learn about where you might have issues. And again, to be fair, we live in this world day in and day out, and our clients often don't. And they don't know what they don't know. And so, they might get on a call and be like, our goal this year is to do, $55 million. And right now we're only on track to do 53. We're $2 million short. It's now July. We need sales tomorrow. And so they come in this call and saying, we heard you guys are amazing at demand generation for B2B, blah, blah, blah. We want to move forward and have you guys help us and we need X more leads a week. And I'm like, okay, that sounds very clear. Love that they're goal oriented and they quantified it, they're smart goals, etc. Let's move forward. And then we go off in our process. And because I rush to yes, which I know I've done way too many times to count, then all of a sudden we realize the problem really wasn't demand generation. It was everything else around their branding, and they don't have a good sales process, and their CRM hasn't been touched in 3 years. It's like all the things that, again, similar to the remodeling comment I made before, you remove the drywall, and you uncover that there's a freaking, raccoon family living behind the wall, and that's where all the mold's coming from, whatever. And so, I think again, what we have done is over the years is which ties in our book that we're going to be announcing here soon, is there typically are a handful-ish of consistent problems that companies run into, and they just don't know that they have those problems. And so, if we could do a really good job at running through a process of identifying where they have gaps and obstacles or opportunities, and how we could help them on leveraging that to really scale, that's where I feel like we go into things with our eyes wide open, and so is the client. So they understand why there needs to be a process on how we do our due diligence to then figure out what tactics make the most sense. First, just launching a massive Google Ads campaign in day two and realize we're just burning money because all the other issues that are why they can't convert those leads, either with their website or their sales team, is what's causing the problem. And so that's why I do appreciate that we are slowing down a little bit, because we are helping us and the client know where we need to focus our energy.
Yeah, and I think this was kind of inspired tangentially a little bit by a current client's experience with wanting to purchase HubSpot. And it's it's probably been maybe it's been a little bit since we've had a client full fresh get HubSpot. We've had help them upgrade and, optimize their packages, but getting someone from, Salesforce into HubSpot, it's been a little bit. And, HubSpot's process, even though they're great at their due diligence and they were pretty sold on wanting to move to this tool, they seemed frustrated at first by HubSpot saying, "I'm sorry, we can't offer you the pricing until we have another call." And you and I had this chat of like, come on, HubSpot, like they're ready to buy. And
Hmm.
through the process, though, the client found that they were asked questions they hadn't considered. They wanted to make sure that HubSpot wanted to make sure that they could truly optimize the use of the tool. So I've heard this happen as well with SaaS products. And I know HubSpot is different than our business, but what was encouraging was to see I don't want you to just sign a deal. I don't want a deal. I want a client. I want an evangelist for this platform. I want you to grow your business using this platform. And I want to make sure that you know how to do that before you even make the purchase. Are you eyes wide open when you go into this buy? And I thought that was really super smart. As someone who's on the purchasing side a lot and still going through, transitions with tools that are not going well, it really helps to put more information up front because you don't know what you don't know. And I think inevitably, 9 times out of 10, a stakeholder comes out of nowhere that was like, well, I want to be involved in this process.
Yep.
I didn't know anything about this. Like, and then they got to ask all the questions over again. But how cool is it if the client already knows the answers to all those questions because HubSpot really equipped them with all the information up front? And so
Yeah,
then they
I
seem
love
like,
that.
and that to me is like, now it's trust, it's a relationship, which I think ties into, sort of our last point is why this is so important for service-based businesses is the whole slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I think it was Greg McCune said that in Essentialism or Effortless maybe, but that really is true. And it's so hard because it's almost like people who go on vacation after hustling for so long, they find it really hard to slow it back. And they vacation like they work. It's just a grind. Let's hit all these check boxes, let's do all these things. There is something about slowing down, savoring, simmering, and letting it kind of sink in order to feel really confident in the decision. I think people like our business, they've really accepted that I would rather you feel more comfortable and more thoughtful about this process and how we're going to work together than just saying, yep, they're going to solve my problems. Let's sign the deal and we'll figure it out later. I don't think the figure it out later is working as well as it used to. I don't know
Yeah,
if you disagree.
I 100% agree with you on that. And again, it's like I know me and you have our own unique spidey senses. I think for me, I have a really good, gut check regarding when I think, clients need extra love or we uncover new opportunity and we got to figure out a more sensitive way at how to present it because they're maybe having some cash flow concerns. But I think with you, you have really good spidey senses around, am I moving too fast? And again, I know it hasn't happened in a hot minute, but I know it has happened numerous times where it's like I'm on the call with this person, they're a C-suite executive, checking off every box regarding our requirements. It felt like a great fit, blah, blah, blah. And we kept moving forward. And I probably moved too fast. And to your point, which is probably why you made that example, is, when we get to the contract phase, we think it's a good deal. We're starting lining up all of our project planning. And then out of nowhere comes somebody that I've never even heard of before who really was the true decision maker. And even though I asked the question, who's impacted by this decision, I didn't say who's the decision maker. I worded it more of a in a human way. But again, because I moved too quickly, all of a sudden now, what we thought was going to be a new client we were going to start supporting within a week or two ended up being dragging out for months because we kind of had to start from scratch and then kind of almost even backwards because that person now all of a sudden came into it from a very negative perspective of why, again, they weren't mad at us, but they were mad at their own leadership team of how come they weren't included in this process. They weren't even aware that they were even considering getting rid of their current firm and moving over to us. Um, so again, here I think to your point on wrapping this one up is every single time that I didn't follow our process, which I think is pretty solid, and I allowed because out of my own excitement and passion and whatever my excuses were, more often than not every time, but more often than not, your spidey sense about us maybe missing something ended up biting us. And again, at that point, because the relationship is so new, like I mentioned, 15 minutes ago, it's really awkward to have to go back, be like, oh, we uncovered this one new thing, and here's what the situation is going to look like, either delaying the scope or increasing the scope, whatever it might be. So I think just for everyone's benefit, if I know it's hard for us to say to a company, and again, if you're a service-based organization, think about it this way, that company that's coming to you likely has had this problem for way more than one day. It's probably been quarters or years of an issue. So in theory, in the grand scheme of things, what is 1 or 2 more weeks of properly doing your due diligence to help them and you to make sure that this is really going to be a good fit and you can deliver insane value before you say yes either side? And so that's where my mindset is now is like we're basically building a much stronger house. And if that foundation is not solid, this thing is going to be like a house of cards. And I really want to avoid the headache for our team because we're so big into relationships. And it just is not fun kicking off in this, super exciting level. And all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, we go sideways because I missed something in the business development process.
Well, and earlier you mentioned that it was somewhat similar to recruiting, which, really made me think there was like a little bit of a stress point last year when I was deep in our recruiting season, I guess. And it was the candidates market. more than it was an employer market at that time. And so there was this hustle to make sure your process was fast enough that you wouldn't lose a candidate to someone else. And I think you and I had some chats then too where I have a really good process. I don't feel like it's quote long and drug out, but there are multiple steps and I'm really clear with candidates that it's an investment on both sides. I don't want you to make a bad decision. I want you to make an informed decision, and the only way to do that is to have more conversations. And in addition to that, as a employer recruiting, you want to see the consistency in those conversations. And I think having you and I, having this chat now, I'm seeing the similarities, which I'd never really seen that in the biz dev process before. It just seemed sort of like its own animal, but it is similar that we're recruiting clients just as much as they are us.
Yep.
And I think you and I can probably work on what are the things that, and I've gotten a lot better at it, and as you have too, like the things that are important to you. What are those? Instead of calling them deal breakers, I've actually started calling them non-negotiables, which
Hmm.
actually makes the list smaller. Deal breakers, I think, can be overused, but is it a true non-negotiable? Like toilet paper roll over under? Come on, that's
Oh,
not a
so
non-negotiable.
important.
It's not a non-negotiable. But like working out first thing in the morning, that's an absolute non-negotiable. So what are those things that you could have in your biz dev process? Is it building trust or are you just chasing a yes? And I think like evaluating each step in that process, as you and I have talked about before, having that good experience. Kaylin and I just talked about it in a previous podcast with the candidate experience. Same thing for the prospect experience. Just because it might not be a yes doesn't mean it's not a today. You still want to, they came to you for a reason. And so having the conversation, learning what you can about them, and preparing them for maybe a yes and in the future is still a way to approach it. And I think often a lot of sales teams sort of miss that as well as part of the process. That just because they might not be a fit today doesn't mean they're never a fit. That's why nurturing campaigns exist, right? So,
I was going to say, again, the parts when me and you chat about this, and we chat about this yesterday a little bit during our weekly meeting, is I love when me or you are on the other side of the equation, where we're trying to be sold to, and I kind of actually enjoy. I know maybe you don't, but I love being in a really bad sales process because I learn so much from that, and it makes me realize and how validating is when I do my job correctly. And again, I know I'm not perfect, and I often make some mistakes. But when I do follow the process, it works every single time. And I just feel like it's so neat from I think from a client point of view where the experience of working with us is very consistent on the business development side of how thorough we are and caring, and we really dot our I's and cross our T's, and then how we handle them ongoing. Because I know we chat about this probably on many of our past podcasts, but it all comes back down to trust. And I'm very empathetic when I think about it because I've been on the client side. They're essentially outsourcing a significant part of their marketing, and some of our clients, almost all of it, because they don't have a marketing department. We're basically essentially their outsourced marketing departments. They can't physically see us every single day. Even some of our clients aren't even in our state, and so you get that geographic delay as well, or gap. And so I think for us, like if the client behind the scenes has no clue where they're at in this process, both on the business development side and then the ongoing side, they're going to start feeling anxious. And maybe, they're not going to speak up. But the problem is when they finally do speak up, they might be so emotional about it, where if we understood things and we had followed our process, I think we would have tackled things, before they became a problem. And that's why I think, to your point of kind of wrapping this one up is when we do follow our process, the clients know, okay, this meeting is about this one thing. And so if we both agree at the end of this meeting that we do want to move forward, the next meeting is going to be about X. And they know at every step along the way, without being condescending, here is what you can expect from us at each touch point. I think that they really appreciate that because they aren't walk into it because they don't live with us and see us day in, day out, and they have no clue what we're thinking. And again, obviously, the trust is a big part, but then also is communication. And so I just feel like if you're a service-based organization and you do value, that lifetime relationship and your engine is profitable because of those correct lifetime, long-term relationships, it's just so much better to start off on the right foot from day one.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes without saying, but because our podcast is Revenue Rewired, the point of the long sales cycle is you want to retain them because you want them to choose you for the right reasons. And obviously, retention equals better revenue, and then you're not wasting it trying to recapture some of those losses, which you could have avoided with a more intentional, thoughtful sales cycle or sales process. So,
Yeah, and I think to your point there, I know recently we've been talking about this, and we obviously every year look at how we can constantly improve it because obviously the world changes and you have to adjust based upon AI and all the other things out there. But I think again, the neat part about it is I know a lot of companies that are on the service side where they fail is the marketing team isn't aligned with the sales team. So the marketing team is just, I want to get you leads that we think make sense. And the sales team is like, these are garbage leads, but they might close some of them. And then they pass the buck, over to the customer service team who's like, these are the worst clients. And I think for us, again, I want to recommend to people that are listening to this is that you don't want to work in a silo. And so I know it might come across frustrating and it might slow down your process when you have someone ready to sign and you feel like it's a good fit. You need to understand when sales is talking to, client service or customer services team, they need to understand that you're checking their boxes off too. And so I think again the job of the sales team is really understand not only is this company going to be a good long-term fit back to your the revenue rewired theme, but also what does the onboarding team need to have the highest level of success and to give the most amazing experience possible where that company is excited to sign up with you. And that's the part that I'm really proud about that we're doing a really good job at thinking that through because it's kind of neat, like on passing the baton from department to department in a smooth way. That only happens if you have also trust and high communication internally as well as with your client.
mm-hmm. Darn Skippy.
Darn
And
Skippy, freshy
go
fresh.
back and well, I'm trying to keep it quote clean on this podcast so we don't have to put the explicit box on there.
I
But
haven't
go back
cursed
and
yet. I
listen
think
to
I've
our
been pretty
onboard.
good.
You have. Don't jinx yourself. Don't jinx. We're going
Oh
to end it
God.
right now before Jay ends up dropping a
F
ball.
yeah.
All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode and we'd love any questions. Podcast at stringcaninteractive.com. And we hope you all have a great day. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.